Hey HR friends, this video will demonstrate how to quickly read the space-time clocks. The space clock reveals the 32 perspectives a participant must learn and balance to successfully complete this simulation's first-person objective. The time clock reveals the 32 perspectives a participant must learn and balance to successfully complete this simulation's third-person objective. To clearly understand what every participant is expected to learn, we need to review the design of these clocks. The first thing I want you to do is compare the space and time clock and see that they're organized in the same way. Meaning the larger or macro pattern of color is the same on both clocks, and that the smaller or micro pattern of color is also the same on both clocks. All right, we're going to start by discussing the macro pattern first. Now, whether it's the macro pattern or the micro pattern, they will both start and end at this position on both the time and on the space clock. Both of these patterns just create circles, so this will be where the circle starts, this will be where the circle ends. This is the circular macro pattern. Circle starts, red, yellow, green, orange, circle ends, macro pattern. All right, let's do it on the time clock. Circle starts, red, yellow, green, orange, circle ends. Fantastic, it's that easy. That's the overall repeating pattern. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how that larger macro circular pattern is then being repeated through each one of these 90-degree quadrants. Now, you can see that the macro pattern starts with red. Well, so does the micro pattern, starts with red. The macro pattern ends with orange. You can see in this quadrant, it will end with orange. So for the red quadrant, here's the sequence at the micro level. Red, yellow, green, orange. Now, when we move to the yellow quadrant, that same micro pattern will repeat again. Red, yellow, green, orange. Here's the green quadrant at the macro level. Here's the micro pattern that borders it. Red, yellow, green, orange. Finally, we're at the orange quadrant. Here we go again. Red, yellow, green, orange. All right, so before we move on here, the thing we need to talk about next are what these double shapes are, because as I was showing you this micro pattern, I skipped over them. We went red, yellow, green, orange. Well, what is this? What is this shape? What is this shape? What do they mean? Well, to understand what these dual shapes mean, we're going to come back to the macro pattern with just a little bit more detail now that we've connected these two things together. So we know the macro pattern starts here, it starts with red, and then it transitions into yellow. So when red transitions into yellow, that same thing is happening here in the micro. Red is transitioning into yellow. This shape refers to this place on the macro pattern. So if you see this combined shape that's in between red and yellow, it just means that's the place where the red and yellow quadrants, that's where they meet. Now, in the macro pattern, the second transition is between the yellow and the green. All right, let's look at the micro pattern. Here it is, yellow to green. This dual shape just represents where the yellow and the green meet. All right, now in the third phase of the macro pattern, it's a transition through green to orange. So let's find it here, green to orange. If you see this dual shape that's in between green and orange is just referencing this part of the macro pattern. This is the micro equivalent of this macro position. All right, so the final transition in the macro pattern is orange ends and red starts. So look what happens here. Orange ends, that's the end of the red quadrant for the micro pattern, and red will start this for the new quadrant, which is the yellow one. Now, so if you see this combined shape, a red and an orange shape, it just refers to this position right here. All right, so now that we've discussed what the dual shapes mean and you understand that they relate to these transitional zones in the pattern, now we can show you why this is the start and the end. It's pretty easy to see. So at the macro level, the first transition happens, it's between red and yellow. At the micro level, it's orange, red. Second transition, macro level, yellow, green. At the micro level, look, it's still orange, red. Third transition, macro level, we've got green to orange. At the micro level, look what's happening here, orange to red. At the fourth or final transition in the macro before the pattern repeats, it ends with orange, starts with red, micro pattern, ends with orange, starts with red. It's the only place the two patterns synchronize. This is why it's the start and the end of this pattern. So, what are these patterns designed to do? The repeating macro pattern is designed to facilitate immature, self-based choice. This pattern explains our defensive design and the destructive side of human nature. The repeating micro pattern is designed to facilitate mature, whole-based choice. This pattern explains conscious learning and the constructive side of human nature. All right, let's bring in the space-time labels so we can discuss how these interconnected patterns work. We're going to start by talking about the macro pattern first, and that's because this is the pattern that's designed to confuse us, and this confusion happens at multiple levels and starts the moment we're born. So that's how we're going to start talking about this macro pattern, is from the moment we're born. So when we're born into this simulation, we'll be born either a son or a daughter. Well, what are we born with? Not a whole lot, right? We've got some senses, and those senses allow us to take in our experiences, and that's how we're starting to form a self perspective. That's what these S's stand for in the lower quadrants of both clocks. It relates to the forming of a self perspective. Now, you can imagine a self perspective is going to lead to selfish choices and selfish, immature decisions that are going to lead to conflict and stress. And this happens because it's in the design. We're designed not to know how this works. We're born into this larger shared reality, and all we're given is our self perspective. And then we're trying to figure out how we fit into that bigger picture and what it is we're supposed to be doing in our self-based opinion. Okay. Now, let's talk about the next thing that causes confusion within this simulated experience. So we're going to talk about the negative and the positive signs now, okay? And to best describe when this happens is the negative and positive signs have to do when we mature our masculine and feminine perspectives. Well, that happens during puberty. So in puberty, what's happening is there are going to be hormones that are going to increase on the masculine side, testosterone for one. And there are going to be hormones that increase on the feminine side, estrogen for one. And what these hormones do is they take what we would see in our shared reality and they distort it depending on your sex. So if you are male and you have testosterone, and what that's going to do is it's going to focus your perspective and how you see this. It's going to make it a little bit more aggressive or individual or independent in the way that you see shared experience. Well, what happens in females is, for example, estrogen helps to broaden perspective, makes it a little bit more social or at a family level dynamic. So all that means is if two individuals, male and female, after they've gone through puberty, see the same event, the chemistry of their body distorts how they see the same shared event. That way, a male will see something different than a female sees, and you can see how that can cause conflict and stress as well. All right, the last part we're going to talk about is the most deceptive of all of them, and it has to do with the regulatory systems in our body. We have conscious and unconscious regulatory systems in our body, and there is a part of the unconscious system that's called the fight or flight defensive response, or fight or flight reflex. And what it does is it's a self-protecting mechanism. It protects our self-perspectives. And if somebody questions our self-perspective or makes us feel like the way we think about life might not be right or isn't completely right, well, we're going to become defensive. That mechanism actually creates a cascade of events that try to convince us to either fight for our perspective or run away from the one that someone's trying to share with us. So you can understand how that defensive reflex is then reinforcing our selfishness and our limited viewpoints. And even though we think we're running away from stress, it's actually what's creating it. Okay, you can see now this is kind of tricky, right? And when you look around and you think about what's going on in your life and you see what's going on in the world around us, it's starting to make sense why there's so much stress and conflict. It's designed to be this way. In fact, I would explain the macro pattern like gravity. It's constantly pushing us down. It's constantly trying to keep us segregated, independent, confused, and fighting each other. And if we do that, it's self-defeat. We defeat ourselves by all the conflict and the stress that we create. So, okay. That is the hurdle to completing the objective. So we know that this macro pattern is trying to keep us immature and create immature choices. So what do we have to do to create mature choices? Well, that's where this micro pattern comes in. This micro pattern is all about all the experiences that you have with all the people in your life, whether it's your family, your community, your work, and it's sharing your perspective with all those people in your life and allowing them to share their perspective with you. It's you learning about yourself, but also taking time to learn about others. And when you take the time to balance learning about yourself with learning about others, you start to form this W up here, this whole-based perspective. A whole-based perspective is a mature perspective. So the macro pattern is trying to keep us immature. The micro pattern is trying to help us learn from all of the different interactions we've had with all the different perspectives on life so that we can make choices that are balanced and will not only eliminate our stress, but eliminate the stress of the other people we share life with. All right, so let's run over to the time clock here quickly and talk about what happens to a male and a female when they mature their perspectives. So on the male side, when you mature, you don't just think about the individual anymore like you started out. Now you're scaling up to a little bit larger vantage point, and now you want to do something good for your nation. You want to help develop a nation that's going to make sure individuals have equal opportunity. And if you're on the female side, you were already focusing on the family, but if you're really concerned about your family, when you mature and you're starting to think about the bigger picture, you're going to focus more on, well, how do we help every family by creating an equal and balanced world? Now, that's just what maturing perspectives are going to want to do. A mature perspective doesn't just think about themselves, so they're going to organize at larger levels. That's why the nation and the world becomes the focus of the masculine mature, and the world becomes the feminine mature view. And you integrate these two views together if you actually want to create that, because which one's right? They're both right. You can't create balance by only having masculine perspectives because half the population isn't designed to see that. Women are designed to see this, men are designed to see this. So in order for us to have no conflict and eliminate stress and to have an environment where we all thrive in the future, we got to do all this. And to do all this means we have to overcome that macro pattern that keeps trying to trip us up. All right, in the beginning intro, I say, hey, if you understand how these patterns work, you can eliminate about 83% of stress. That's a huge number, but that number comes with awful hard work for anybody who's into mindfulness or trying to expand their awareness. That's what this is. And to overcome the macro pattern, you have to commit to whole-based, neutralizing thought 24/7, because what you'll realize is our world is designed for conflict.
If you don't want there to be conflict, then you have to make the conscious choice that you're going to be part of the solution that eliminates this conflict. That's what Health Reconnected is all about. That's what we're here to help you do. All right. The next video is going to explain how to read the hands on the clock now that you kind of understand what all this stuff means. That the bottom half of the clock has to do with immature perspectives, the top half of the clock has to do with mature perspectives, and the hands of the clock are just going to help you understand how you integrate these mature and immature perspectives in a way that creates peace and prosperity for all of us. See you next video.